Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Jenny Dearborn. I am the Executive Vice President in HR, in charge of talent, leadership, and learning and organizational effectiveness. Super excited to welcome Patty Fletcher today. Want to thank everyone for being here live, but also those watching on our live stream online. So welcome everyone from around the world. So my role, I'm responsible for the global talent strategy, the global leadership strategy, and learning, and then the execution of those programs. So really, really excited about the knowledge sharing that we are going to have today with Patty and her folks. And it's going to be a really great event. So typically for these types of events, we share lots of internal updates. We're not going to do that today, just a few quick reminders because I'm mindful of the folks externally who are watching. Please go to the SAP SV Jam site for updates of local events that are coming up, including our spring clothing drive. So gently used coats and clothes, please donate that at any Silicon Valley campus between now and the end of May. And then also go online and look at your upcoming events around our affinity groups. So these are ERGs, employee resource groups. We have a ton of ERGs here at SAP, Pride at SAP, the Business Women's Network, the Black Employees Network, and so on. This event is sponsored by our Silicon Valley Business Women's Network that I'm very proud to be executive sponsor of. So lots and lots of choices. Please go to the Silicon Valley Jam site to check those out and make sure you get involved. A big shout out to SAP Silicon Valley that was recently recognized as one of the great places to work in all of Silicon Valley. We are number 8 of all Silicon Valley corporations, so huge congratulations to us. Congratulations to us. Congratulations to everyone here for being a part of that great success. Patty Fletcher is a seasoned business executive. She is a published author. She is an award-winning marketing influencer. She is an angel investor, which means if you have a startup idea, just go talk to her. She's got a lot of money in her purse that she can give you today. So she only carries cash, so just be sure and tell her what you want. You can slip her a little Post-it note or something like that. She'll get you what you need. And she's the author of the book that is on all of your chairs called Disruptors: Success Strategies for Women Who Break the Mold. That is the theme of today's session. She is a sought-after thought leader in large-scale cultural change, transformational leadership, all things relating to human capital management and general business. So we are super excited to have her here as a guest. Come on up. Please welcome Dr. Patty Fletcher.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thought after sounds about right. So it's so good to be here. I have to say, I get to talk about this topic quite a bit and on many stages across the globe. It's a pretty hot topic, right? And I do have to brag for 1 minute and say that since its publication, it's been #1 on my publisher's list, which is pretty freaking cool. It sold out on the first day. So I'd love to think it's about me, but it's not. It's about this topic, and this topic is resonating with both men and women, because the most innovative of us realize it's time that we disrupt the system that is preventing all talent from being able to be harnessed. So what I first of all would like to do is to stop and thank Scott Leatherman. He is the COO of the SAP Silicon Valley Labs. Scott and I have known each other for, gosh, Scott, near a decade maybe? Yeah. And Scott is a disruptor. The stuff he has done here in the Silicon Valley, SAP, a big German company, being part of this community has been instrumental. And I am so grateful for this opportunity, Scott, because this stage feels like home. I grew up in enterprise software at SAP. It enabled me to do a few things like understand when things aren't working, it's usually a systematic problem, not necessarily a blame and shame problem with people. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that background enabled me to not only focus in on the problems of diversity and inclusion and being able to harness all the best and available talent, But most importantly, what are some of the solutions? What can we learn from people just like those of us in that room who have faced adversity from unconscious bias and have been able to disrupt it to get to the finish line that they have defined for themselves and on their own terms? I'm going to talk a little bit after I talk about what brought me to this topic. I'm then going to bring up Anjula and Serbi. Anjula is a VC, and Serbi is a startup founder who just had a really successful exit about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about their experiences. What was the story that brought them to be the disruptors they are today? What are some of the challenges that they see when it comes to bringing new innovation to the market when you have so many unconscious bias barriers against you that are part of the system? So can't wait to have that. So let's get started. So the story from this book really came together 2 generations before I was born. I have had this absolutely crazy fascination of my grandmother, my mother's mother. She babysat me. She watched me for the first 6 or 7 years of my life while my mother worked. My mother was a working mother before working mothers were a thing. So I spent a lot of time with her. She would make me amazing Armenian food and make me feel like the most special person in the world. She'd teach me Armenian words. I don't remember one of them, but it was lovely. It was amazing. But the truth is, I knew very little about her, despite all those hours that we spent together. And in fact, the stuff I did know about her came from my mother. Things like I knew my grandmother was orphaned when she was 6 months old. I knew that she was born in 1915 in Harput, Turkey. I knew that she came to the United States when she was 19 because she was put into an arranged marriage with my grandfather, who is not a very nice man. And that's all I knew. And after she passed away, I was well into adulthood, and my desire to know more about her, it only grew. At the time, I was doing some fancy job at SAP, which if you asked my daughter at the time, she would tell you what I really did for a living was yell at my computer, laugh on the phone, and fly around in an airplane. And those of you who work at SAP are probably like, yeah, that's my job too, right? Exactly, Jenny, exactly. So I had 2 little kids. My husband, yes, was a stay-at-home dad, which afforded me some flexibility, but I really had no time for much else. So I decided perfect opportunity to go back for my PhD while doing all that other stuff. So, right, really an opportune time. Because I had to learn how to research like a scholar in order to learn more about my grandmother. So there I was. Went in to study transformational leadership, focused in a lot on virtual environments and developing net new technology. That's what we were doing at the time here. And I was about a year into my dissertation proposal. And those of you who have done PhDs know your proposal is probably just as much work as the dissertation research itself. It's just crazy and awful and all-consuming and pretty tense. So a year into that, I was forced, and I say that purposely, to take a feminist leadership theory class. It was part of the curriculum. I grew up in a very conservative, meat and potatoes kind of guy-run family in the Northeast, and I was a news junkie from the day I was born. Probably the reason was that's what brought my father and I together. Gosh, I can remember being 3 years old and sitting on his lap and watching Walter Cronkite, and that just kept going throughout my life. We were pretty convinced I was going to replace Peter Jennings when he retired. It didn't happen. So their loss. So we'd watch the news and we'd see women marching in the streets for equal rights. And my father would say things like, you better never do that. You know, all they are is pro-women and anti-men. And so that's what I thought a feminist was. So there I was in this class, kind of, rolling my eyes, I'll take it, I'll checkbox it. And it was in that first day that I realized at the age of, 30-something, that holy moly, I'm a feminist. I also realized that I was always the only woman in the room. Whether it was for my MBA or my work at SAP, I was always the only woman in the room. And at the time, I was focused in on I'm the only American. I'm the youngest one. I'm the only one who does not know how to code. It just never occurred to me because I had an unconscious bias. It just was what it was. So I just did a little bit more digging, saw that there wasn't much research in the technology and life sciences industries, the most technology-intensive industries at the time, and really the most pervasive. Look how much those two industries impact every single part of our lives. So I decided to scrap a whole year's worth of work and change my dissertation topic. My husband didn't talk to me for a good 7 days. And I got to work. And I did a phenomenological study of women who hold board of director positions in publicly held life sciences and technology businesses. There were very few of them, and I got to talk to all of them. And I wanted to understand what got them into a room where so few people have gone, let alone women. There had to be something extraordinary about them. So at about the same time, I started learning more about my grandmother, thanks to that PhD research training. There's a lot more to her story. I found out that when she was 6 months old, her mother put her in a bureau drawer, hid her sister, who was about 8 years old, and sent my Nana's two older sisters, who were 13 and 14 at the time, to a church to go pray because the Turkish soldiers who had killed my great-grandfather, were coming to their part of town to drive the Armenians out. My great-grandmother went outside, created a ruckus, and was killed. And she was hung very close to their home as a symbol for what happens. But from that heroism, she saved my grandmother's life. She saved her children's lives to give them a fighting shot to be able to live for many more years. My 13 and 14-year-old at the time great aunts were in that church praying. They had brothers who were in the mountains hiding with sticks and rocks. So there they were, those two young teenage girls, when the soldiers came to the church and burnt it down. And they would burn down churches because they knew there was one way in and there was one way out. The young girls ran out the door and were given a choice. If you would like to live, then you should marry this high-ranking Turkish military official and his brother. These guys were about 50 at the time. They had to renounce their religion, which is very important to Armenians. They believe they're the first followers of Christ. And it was extremely sad, and the family was split up. They took my grandmother with them and raised her for the first 6 years until eventually she and the middle sister escaped with the help of two former Turkish neighbors that they had. And this picture, that little circle, I had no idea that my grandmother, for the majority of her young life, was raised in refugee camps. We didn't know that. She didn't tell us. That was not a good thing when you came to the United States and you were an Armenian who lived in a refugee camp. You were looked down upon. So that's her in that little circle. We think she was about 9 years old. We discovered this as part of my research. So I was learning all this stuff about my family, right? And here I am with the good fortune of being born in 1969 in America with a mouth I could not seem to keep shut, and a brain that I could not force to stop thinking. And all of this was at odds, right? These powerful women who I have come from, this blood I had come from, this was completely at odds with the women who I started learning from in my dissertation. These weren't women who came from Tier 1 schools, who came from connected families, who had a silver spoon in their mouths. The majority of them went to normal Tier 2 and Tier 3 schools. They came from farm families and small business families and medical families. And they took this purpose that each one of them had inside of them. They started from where they were and they created a platform for change. These are powerful women. So I knew, looking at that opportunity, that potential, with the sheer luck of being born when I was born, that I knew that I needed to leverage my voice and create a platform for the people who do not have a voice on their own. Fast forward 15 years, and I've continued that work. And here's the problem. Nothing's changed. And in fact, so much has become worse. Take a look. Women are about 50% of the workforce. We are responsible for 80 to 90% of all consumer-based decisions. Women control 51% of the wealth in this country. And for startup entrepreneurs like our friend Serbu, who's going to talk to us today, women are responsible for 65% of all awesome exits, right? How great is that? But not so great when we consider that women only receive about 2% of venture funding, are only about 10% of venture partners, represent anywhere, depending on the index, between 12% and 18% of CEOs and board members. So here's the problem. Women have power, but we are not in power. And why is that? Let's go back to SAP and my training. How many of you remember a few months ago over in beautiful Hawaii where there was a scare? Someone in the military pressed the wrong button and they thought a missile was coming their way, right? And I know on this coast, not on my coast over in Boston, so many of you go to Hawaii and you know you're 6,000 miles away from anyone else. Terrifying. It was a mistake, right? It was a mistake. And so when I look at something like that, I have the same question that I have for this topic, where we have such a huge representation of amazing talent. Women are responsible for half of MBAs, more than half of PhDs. They're 90% of valedictorians. We work really, really hard, and yet we have no power. Why is that? So going back to my SAP upbringing, what do we ask? What is the truth that made this possible? It's the same question we always have to ask when there is a reality of what should be, but yet it is not. And the reason's pretty simple. There are 150 different unconscious biases that play at our brains at any given time just at work. There are thousands outside of work. These unconscious biases are fueled by years and years and years of research where only male participants were used to decide things like how decisions should be made. How do we value something? What does success look like? How do you form relationships with other people? How is business done? These have not changed the infrastructure of business for well over 150 years. Our demographic is so different now. The net is we need a new system, but there are people thriving in that system. Think about yourself. When you're thriving in something, right, you absolutely love it, and someone walks up to you and says, great, anyway, nice for you, but I'm gonna go disrupt it. You're not super happy, right? You push back. And that's the message that many of our male pairs and counterparts have heard. That we are all making a choice, back to my father's definition of feminism, that it's men or women, when the truth is, those unconscious biases are preventing us from creating a culture of and. And I will tell you, having done lots of speaking on the university circuit, something I continue to do with seniors in college, bachelor's degrees with MBAs, we focus so much on the digital native component of young talent that we have to have above consumer grade digital. I have to tell you, when it comes to Gen Z, they don't talk about that. They don't care. They barely pay attention. But what they do talk about, and mind you, half the room is always male in my talks. How cool is that? And these are people who have done internships and co-ops where they had real jobs. They weren't making photocopies and picking up dry cleaning, right? They were working on real stuff, and they're raising their hands and they're asking questions around, well, I worked at this company and this is what I saw and this is what I did and it didn't work. What can I do differently next time? They have an expectation, not of diversity, because diversity is ultimately just number counting, but of inclusion, of a culture of and. And if we don't figure that out, then we're in trouble. Ultimately, what we need is a new paradigm for gender equity. Why? Sheryl Sandberg. I love what she did with Lean In. I love that she brought this topic to the mainstream. I don't love the message. That in order to be successful, you have to become more like a man. You have to have more male traits. And let me stop there for a second. I am not talking simply about biology. I'm talking about traits. I have many male traits, many hierarchical, kind of command and control traits in certain situations. But of course, I also have female traits, things like relational decision-making, cultivating relationships, creating high-performance teams where I give them what they need in order to achieve above and beyond their expectations, right? Real transformational, less transactional. But I bet you every man in this room also has both traits. So I want to make that clear. So the answer is not to tell the men and women with these traits, okay, that's nice, go be like that, because that's what success looks like. The answer is to disrupt the system, because the truth is this. If I leaned in anymore, my face would hit the ground. That is not the answer. It's not to fix women, it's to disrupt the system. And that is what we're going to talk about. Anjula Jayasuriya and Surbhi Sana are going to join me on the stage now for a fireside chat, and we're going to talk about how they are disrupting the status quo. Come on up.
Do you want us to
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'm not emailing, by the way. I'm getting questions.
I wouldn't hold it against you if you were emailing.
Okay, so I shared with you my story purposely, because every book, everything that got you to where you are today has a story, right? Mine was formed far before I was born. Others start the day they're born. Some people's story about what got them into the seats they're sitting in today start in adulthood. But it's really important to know where your story started, because ultimately, that's your why. That's your purpose. That's what's going to continue to drive you and help you create the disruption that you want to see in the world. So Anjula and Surbhi are in my book, and I asked them to come today because I wanted them to share with you a particularly Silicon Valley story. The stories in the book are from everywhere around the US. And this one is in particular to this area. Silicon Valley, as we know, may be a bubble, but it's also a very special place. It's where the rest of the world looks to for innovation. It's also a very sexist place. Those systems that are in place are not conducive to an and culture. It's very transactional. As our friend Adam Quinton likes to say, it's not a meritocracy, it's a meritocracy, right? They invest in people, they hire people who look like themselves. That's not an and culture, and thus we are missing out, of course, on incredible investments. So Anjula, I'd love to start with you. The name of the profile in the book of Anjula is, in my book of Anjula, is called From Pariah to Pioneer, and it's one of my favorite stories. Anjula is a PhD, double PhD? Okay, PhD, MD, MBA. She went to Harvard, Oxford. She's a real dummy, and it's just terrible. But she is really one of the first people who saw this connection between net new innovation in the medical world. And as a result, she took up a space in a medical degree program at a time when people really questioned that, right? You took someone else's space, and instead she went the business route, hence the pariah. And from there, look at where the world is now when it comes to investment in stuff like life sciences and healthcare, right? Pretty exciting. So Anjula, I'd love for you to share a bit more about yourself. What got you to this seat and into the book and where you are today?
Thank you, Patty, for having me, and thank you for liking the title. So I chose the word pariah because it's a South Indian word for outcast, not outcast, for low caste, which is an outcast for the most part. And it reflects how I felt. I had done an MD and PhD, and I was in medical training, and I realized that what I really wanted to do was bring innovations to patients. I wasn't creative and innovative like Surbi. I was more going to be an enabler, and I wanted to understand how medicine and science and business came together to form companies to bring innovations from the bench to the proverbial bedside. So I decided to go to Harvard Business School, and overnight, my friends, my peers, literally stopped talking to me, as did my professors. I was hauled in, told that I was a traitor, and that was the word that was used, and what Patty talked about, which is I had taken up a valuable spot in the MD PhD program and prevented somebody worthier from taking that spot. So it was not an easy thing for me to do. I didn't really see everything that was coming. I don't know but I would have done that. I probably would have. And the dichotomy was doctors are noble and business is immoral. And I was lost to the dark side, and that was the story. Fast forward 6 years ago, Harvard Medical School and Business School unrolled a combined MD PhD program, which is going really well. So the story had a good ending. As I explained, I made this transition because I wanted to understand how to bring these discoveries. I was a bench scientist and a physician, and there was a gulf between the two. So then after my MBA, I went to the pharma industry. In fact, I worked in this very building in 1993 when it was Syntex. This was not the same building, it was on this site. So I was at Syntex, which was the company for years, which was the biggest California pharmaceutical company, and was acquired by Roche. I stayed through that, so I learned about the pharmaceutical industry. Then I went on to biotech, and then finally felt like I had knew enough to go into venture capital. So I was very heady when I got into venture capital. I had multiple offers. It was easy for me to get into, and I thought I was invincible, and I thought all the statistics didn't apply to me. I didn't really appreciate also that I was going backwards. Medicine at that time was 15% women, and VC has stayed, anyone's guess, between 2 to 6% somewhere there. It hasn't changed, right? So I was doing very well, enjoying my first VC job. I was a principal in a company that had a woman partner, and lots of other women around me. And then I was aggressively wooed by a Silicon Valley VC firm I was wined and dined and called and courted, and the firm consisted of 3 male partners, nobody else. It was very flat. And they said they wanted me to be their first female partner. So, I thought I was just flying. And so I accepted. 6 short months later, I was fired. And very unceremoniously so. And the reasons when I asked, because it came out of nowhere, I was told that I was not a good fit, maybe not surprising, and also that I had poor investment judgment because I had chosen a technology that turned out actually to be very useful and successful. But hindsight is 20/20. And it was a huge, enormous blow to my ego. I'd done so well in everything I'd done until then, and I really had to piece my ego and myself and my career back together. And it was a dark time. So this also really opened my eyes, that I was not above the statistics and the environment, and not quite as invincible, in fact, quite vulnerable. And so then I became aware of the relevance of two obvious and one less obvious characteristic of venture capital. We all know about the paucity of senior women. We know about the paucity of entrepreneurs who are funded by VC. What also clicked was that there was a paucity of innovation and entrepreneurship in all the areas that were primarily of interest to women, including women's health. So that was really what sort of set me on realizing my new course. So then let's fast forward to Subi. So in November of 2009, I met Subi at the La Salta Starbucks at 1:45 in the afternoon. I met a very serious and laser-focused young woman. She was less than a month after her 25th birthday, and she had a plan. I mean, she had thought of everything. And to boot, she was both the innovator, inventor, patent author, and the CEO. She was going to embrace all these roles, and I saw in her something that I've rarely seen before. And so my role in the early days was mostly of just being a sounding board and also making some introductions. I was able to introduce her to her first seed round of investors and to some of the Series A, and I participated in a small way in all three series, and the odds against her were huge. First of all, the field. Medical technology is less interesting for venture capitalists than biotech, and by far less than tech. We can talk about this later if you want to know, but medtech is not an interesting field, or not considered attractive. Women's health in medtech was really unattractive. Female founders in a very male world of engineers, dominated by engineers and male doctors in medtech, unlike biotech, also not great. Very young, no decades of experience. That was thought to be de rigueur. And Subi was able, by herself, to be able to overcome all of this. And now I witnessed with her some sort of rough behavior, but we will not dwell on the negatives, and we'll dwell on the positives. And Subi was able to convince them. She was always extremely well prepared. She anticipated all the possible questions. In fact, she just asked me, are there any other questions that you can think of that people might want to know? And it was this anticipation and preparation. But not only that, I mean, her ability to be creative, and it was a package of one that really is terribly, terribly rare. Most people have one of those and build a team. She did build a team, but she still was able to oversee the entire team and knew what she wanted, and she hired also very well. So just if I'm grateful to Subi for acknowledging my role, especially in the early days of Envision. And I would like to now just stop and let Subi, maybe, or you, talk about
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to continue to talk about Subi, so Subi doesn't talk herself. So Subi, you and I met, I think you introduced us, Angela, in about 2012, right? When you were first kind of forming together. I wrote that piece in Economy, I think, about you, about what to do when you're facing a tsunami. And I have to tell you, I'm not shocked by what happened last week. Subi's business, Envision, successfully exited, being acquired by Boston Scientific with a deal worth potentially $275 million. That is after 6 years exactly.
Thank you.
So think about that, right? Think about that. She was a young woman with a bachelor's degree, as Angela said, non-Caucasian, woman of color, She did not have several experiences with trials, even though that is not needed in what she has. She didn't have, as Anjula said, a bunch of letters after her name. She wasn't highly connected. She had no PhD. And look at her now. She is solving a problem and a challenge that happened to her, just like I did, right, with my story. Her story started with a personal experience. Her part of the book, where we put the Femtech founder, is in a chapter called, it's in each of the chapters are split by myths, right? Because we want to know the system, we want to know what the myth is, because once we get that knowledge and that awareness, we're woke, and we can actually do something about it. We can do, as Anjula said, learn from what actually works so we can keep doing it again. And what happens when you do that is you pave the path for the person coming right behind you. So whereas Anjula's myth that she busted was define your own finish line. Who says you have to pick one or the other, right? Anjula defined her own finish line. Surbi's chapter is about you have to choose between your career and your family. It is really hard to be Surbi's age and a woman and raise money, because there is the doubt around the maternity penalty. And Surbi did actually have a child during this time. And again, look how she's successful. Every single myth out there, she has busted. So Surbi, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure. She's as cool as a cucumber. When I talked to her last week after the acquisition, I was all ecstatic and running around and saying things like, oh my God, aren't you so excited? How are you so calm? Put it on a t-shirt and wear it around. Nah, not really. She's like, whatever, I have to go talk to my new boss. So as cool as a cucumber. I kept talking after we hung up. As cool as a cucumber. So Surbi, tell us a little bit about what inspired you for this, what happened in your life, and then fill us in on what it was like to be in your shoes at your age and facing this kind of huge amount of barriers against you.
Okay. So how much time do we have? I'm just kidding. So first of all, thank you guys so much for sharing a bit of your afternoon with us today and with me. And also, what an honor and a pleasure to share the stage with these two fantastic women. I clearly need to step my shoe game up. Like many steps.
I'll put in the memo next time.
Yeah, so, you know, a little bit about sort of what inspired me to start the company and what the company was all about. So in high school, I had a health scare. I remember that I was writing a paper on Emerson, and that's why I quote him a lot now. And all of a sudden, I felt such a sharp pain in my side where I could barely make it to my mom and say my side hurts before blacking out. And the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital, and I didn't know it then. That was going to be the first of many trips. And it turned out that I was suffering from a complex ovarian cyst. So this is a problem that still exists today. A ultrasound will tell you whether or not there's a mass, but not whether that mass is cancerous. And after that, you're kind of presented with an option. Do you want an invasive surgery to remove the ovary, or would you like to wait and see if you have one of the most lethal cancers impacting women, right? So I was one of the lucky ones. My parents chose not to do the surgery, and it was not cancerous, but that was kind of put in my mind that I one day wanted to start a company to tackle this problem of early detection of ovarian cancer. And so, you know, in some ways, I had that luxury to be able to be very deliberate with my time and my decisions at sort of a young age. So everything I did after that, I thought, how does this bring me one step closer to one day starting this company? So I went to UC Berkeley, studied molecular and cell biology and bioengineering, and then decided that I would go work for a big company so that I could understand how proper systems are set up, and then went to the startup world, did some product development engineering, and then around 2009, one of the very first papers were written about the fallopian tube origin of ovarian cancer. and it was from the National Cancer Institute. And basically what it said is, the reason that we're catching this disease so late is we've been looking in the wrong place. It actually starts in the fallopian tube. And if you think about it from a biological perspective, that makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of cellular turnover that happens in the fallopian tube. So it's kind of highly debated at the time. I just kind of saw promise in it, and I kind of waited for it to go to fruition. So there I was, few years of work experience, non-Caucasian, if some of you might have noticed and was pointed out. Not a guy. Yeah. Maybe that one's less obvious, I don't know. Yeah. But so there I am, and I'm thinking like, what do? I have no network at all, and I can like read about what goes to slide deck, but there must be a better way to do this. And I remember thinking, oh, one of my girlfriend's dads like sold a company in high school. I remember that. So I asked if I could come over for dinner, and I was asking the dad for questions, to ask some questions, and he wasn't very helpful. But her mom was like, oh, I know this like woman who's doing some like venture funding like out of India, would you like to speak to her? And I think one of the luckiest moments in my career that ended up being Anila. So, there's people like, there's giants that let you sit on their shoulders, and then there's people that help you up the ladder. There are people that see you below the ladder and just like toss you over their heads, right? So that was the kind of experience it was to work with Anila. So she had introduced me, as she said, to everyone that came into the seed round. The connection was through Anila. And yeah, it was fun. I mean, the whole journey was amazing, and
it was amazing, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
And it never is. But it is, I know that it's particularly hard from a female perspective. So, Anya, you and I have sat on a board together for a very long time. We're in the same angel group. And when I hear Surbi's story, I'm not surprised. You have created such a voice and a platform to say, hey, investor world, it's different when you are a woman founder. This is how we process information. This is how we learn. This is how we like to work with others. And that's not a great place to be. I've been in some pretty heated discussions that you've had. And so here you are helping this young founder solve a very serious problem that not only impacted her, but gosh, there's so many women, right, around the globe. So if there are Surbis out there, and we know they are from the deal flow that we see come through, and we had such a successful exit, but yet we're not investing, what's wrong? What's wrong with venture? Why is it so broken? And what can we do about it?
So I think you alluded to this in your great introduction. You talked about a systemic problem. I do not point the finger at male venture capitalists. I think it's a situation that we are all part of. You talked about implicit bias.
Yes.
I'm just as biased as my male venture capitalist. And so the issue is, the reason why it becomes a problem is because it's amplified. And bear with me while I go through some of the characteristics of venture capital, which I'm sure you all know about. But they're usually very small groups, and they're operated as closed systems, and they're not subject to external scrutiny. So there's not a whole lot of transparency and reporting. This is in contrast to large companies and public equities. At least there is more transparency, and because they're typically private, there aren't these checks and balances that there might be. Experienced VCs know that it's all about the people. Really, the technology is secondary, except in maybe outlying cases. It's really about the people. And if you're human, you have a greater affinity for people like you. You understand them better. You understand the challenges that they're trying to solve, because they probably are problems that you thought about, and so they resonate. And then when you're going to be an early stage investor, you're with that person or those people and that problem for a very long time. So you're making, I think if you're choosing something that really resonates with you and your resonance is driven by your characteristics, then it's fairly natural that you would choose, men would choose other men or problems that affect men. And despite all the due diligence and the frameworks and algorithms, the decisions are usually made by a single or a small number of people, and they're driven by soft factors. Intuition, fit, can I work with this person? So in the case of venture capital, these human tendencies are amplified. And why does that matter? Because they work with entrepreneurs and early stage technologies, they can have a very outsized impact from these human tendencies. I think, and probably if VC were all female, perhaps we would have skewed in the other way. I mean, I don't know. It's possible that women are socialized to think more about other people and men and children, and perhaps they would have been able to find the middle, but perhaps not. I mean, I think what you talked about is not either or inclusivity, and this is a story about how we need both, because society is comprised of both, and the world we live in is comprised of both. I think the other thing that you talked about is that, Patty, about we're being stymied and we don't get the benefit of the female or other points of view, the problems that they think are important, the solutions that they come up with to problems, the insights, all these other learnings are also not available to society. Society is being deprived of them. And then there's a whole economic issue too. And just thinking about women's health, women's health is actually a huge area. But if you, and I would welcome you to go ask a traditional VC, and they will tell you, can't make money in it. There are no innovations. Very small market. Not my area of expertise, which is true. Too embarrassing to speak about it, vaginas and ovaries and periods. I keep away from bikini medicine. And when there are so many other areas in which I can invest, why would I bother going there?
I just have to interrupt you for 1 second. This is really vulgar, so Jenny might get mad at me. But one of my chapters in the book begins with the fact that up until recent history, men were the ones who designed, marketed, and sold all the tampons in the world. But yet they can't
and
invest.
Sanitary pads too.
Yes, exactly.
And
yet that.
There's an amusing story by one of the women at Kimberly-Clark who said that their high point was when they designed ads for tampons and sanitary napkins where the women were flying like angels while using, and
it's
most women don't feel like angels while they're. I think it's an understandable human problem, and I think we have an understandable human solution. And I think the example of what Surbhi has accomplished, and what Surbhi always wanted, was, of course, her success, but also creating an example and a pathway for the field. And I think that is what you have. You've built up this momentum, which has the power, with some pushing, to become a movement.
Yeah, absolutely. We only have a few minutes left, I think, and then we're going to turn it over to Q&A. Anya, you did such a good job of painting the reality of the investment side, and Surbhi, you living on the founder side, the entrepreneur side. And one of the common challenges that a new startup founder who has been funded has is, once they get past the funding, it's their relationship with the board. How do they work with the board? It's incredibly difficult to do, right? Not only at the big corporate level, but at the startup level. And when that board is comprised mostly of people who are funding your business, it's even more difficult. Women tend to feel pressure from VCs to exit sooner than they want. They don't necessarily, they feel far more attached to their IP, including their people. So I'd love to get from you, what was that experience with your board? How did you create that relationship and leverage the board to get you to where you are?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting now being part of a larger company and kind of seeing some of those skill sets that you develop in managing a board and how they translate, right? Because a lot of things at a larger company are done by committee, right? So, and I mean, to me, it always kind of came down to the individual relationships, and you know, there's pretty two distinct schools of thought on this. But for me, like, the board was never somewhere where I would go to brainstorm. It was more, hey, look, this is the update. These are the risks on the milestones that we have going on, and I would make sure that if there was any member of the board who I thought would be unhappy with any slide or anything like that, any topic, to call them beforehand, right? So. One of my mentors had kind of coached me early on, let there be no surprises to anyone in a board setting. And so throughout the life of the company, had two different boards, and two that looked wildly different, where the first one consisted all of women, which was amazing, and investors, and the second one, which was a split between investors and myself and another very successful CEO. And so you just, even with a very different board composition, I think some of those principles of, you know, being transparent and letting them know where the risks are beforehand, and then also nurturing those individual relationships and speaking to them sort of beforehand, where they're not doing any sort of learning during a board meeting. That's always risky. Was very helpful for me.
Yeah. So I love her answer. I have yet to meet a woman who wakes up in the morning and asks herself, who's going to impress me today? And I have yet to meet a man who wakes up in the morning grinding his hands together and wondering who he's going to put down. She's a human being. You can create relationships. You can be a CEO. You can be a founder. When we step back from this power imbalance, it's kind of absurd, isn't it? It's absurd that we don't have the opportunity for more Serbies out there. I want to thank both of you and ask you to stay on the stage with me. I'd love to take some questions now. We've covered quite a bit. Does anyone have questions? I'm going to start calling on people if you don't. Anyone? Yes, good. I was just about to call on Scott Leatherman. Go ahead.
Hi. I hate to be the man asking questions, since they never have the problems of doing that.
Asking questions. Yes.
We love it.
Well, but this also has to do with. So we've been talking a whole lot about diversity. We've been talking a whole lot about disrupting and thinking things differently.
Yeah.
You know, everybody carries their own frame of reference with them.
Yep.
Everybody carries their. You know, we have a tendency, because we live in such a cosmopolitan area like the Bay Area, that we tend to think of ourselves as, you know, like a great driver. You know how everybody thinks they're a great driver and very few people actually are. So part of it is that how can we do a better job of uncovering our own unconscious biases?
Excellent question.
And how can we do a better job of looking for some of the things, instead of thinking, hey, I'm doing a great job. You know, everybody's honking behind me, but, you know, the road's clear ahead of me, you know.
Yeah.
So how can we do something like that?
First of all, I'm an excellent driver. I learned how to drive in Boston, and I think those honks behind me are just, you're doing great, Patty. So in terms of unconscious bias, so what have we done so far? We typically do the blame and shame, right? We point at you and say, you think you're a good driver. What about that guy you just rear-ended, right? That never works. That's not the answer. The only thing that helps you get over unconscious bias is called decision interruption. It is at the point of decision where it's, is that really the right thing to do? Does that really make sense? is that factual, are there alternatives? The truth is, it's very hard to do that for yourself. You usually need a catalyst, and that's why diversity, again, is about the numbers, but inclusive teams are so important. Because when you and I go out to lunch and you're driving in your car and you, I don't know, decide to take a left turn and you don't put your indicator on, which, yeah, I do all the time. I just don't want to give people a head start on what I'm doing, so whatever. But it might not be the safest thing in the world, right? So the passenger sitting next to you who has a different thought will interrupt your decision. Those are called nudges, right? So instead of, you're making the wrong decision, that blame and shame, it's more, did you think about it? Gives you an alternative. And that's why it's so important to be a people kind of leader.
Yeah, and one trick that I use, and I ended up having a very diverse team, racially, all age ranges, you know, it was a lot of fun for me. One trick that I use is it's very easy to kind of understand what you're feeling and not always easy to understand why you're feeling it. So, and it sounds like a lot of work that whenever you're having like a disagreement with someone or something kind of rubbed you the wrong way, to then, you know, go home that evening and kind of dissect the why. But similar to practicing gratitude, when you make it a habit, it starts happening very naturally, and the more you do it, the more you pick up patterns. So that's one thing that, you know, for me personally has been like very effective. Like, yeah, like I know that I'm irritated, I know that but like, why exactly? And then imagine someone else with a slightly different profile doing the same thing. So it does take a lot of, right, because this is not a bias that you know that you have, so you do have to kind of like work on it actively. But I've found that to be really helpful.
And just to tack on to that, if you go to drpattyfletcher.com, you can download what's called the Ladder of Inference, and it's very much like that. It's a step-by-step approach where you essentially take subjectivity out of it, right? You analyze a situation, you understand your triggers, the other person's triggers, and then that enables you to answer the why, because everything we do is informed from the story that got us here. It's an excellent question.
I want to just add one other thing. So Patty and I serve on the board of ASTIA, which empowers women entrepreneurs, and also was an angel investor in Surabhi's company in Series A. And the board started out, ASTIA is a decade old, over a decade old, started out with only women on the board. And something that we did consciously was to strive for 50% men on the board. And it was actually much easier when we were all women on the board. I mean, in terms of all agreeing, getting things done. It's really slower, but the end product is much better. Our board meetings go on longer. We have to debate things that I would never have thought that we would have to debate and things like that. But it brings us discipline and improves. Again, it's not the easiest path, but you probably have a better outcome. And then also I married a white guy who said that helps.
I was going to call you out on stage here, David. And that's why, like, the work, Jenny, that your team does is so critical. It is so hard to lead a diverse team. It's so difficult because there are so many ideas. And not just ideas, but ways of working, right? So many different stories. It is much easier to be a meritocracy than it is a meritocracy, right? So it's just so difficult, but look how critical that is.
Difficult in the short term.
That's right.
Easier in the long term. Because in the short term, the diverse mindset and the different approaches, folks see things differently than you do. You discover, different potential pitfalls. So it's easier in the beginning when everyone agrees with you, but you don't want that, because 6 months down the road or something, you're gonna fall into a pit you could have otherwise avoided.
Yes, absolutely. So with that, we need to close. I would love to thank Jenny and Scott and your teams for having us up here, for getting the books for everybody. As you can tell, I'm a fan of talking. So if you would like to continue the conversation, I'll be in the back of the room doing some book signings. I got really good at it over the last few months. Absolutely connect with me on social, and For those of you listening in, thank you so very much for joining us. You're missing out on a really awesome amount of fabulous food, and maybe we have cocktails here, maybe we won't, but you won't know that because you're not here. So with that, thank you so much, everybody.